Have you ever wondered why people are so obsessed with Marvel? Hi, I'm Angelique Nairn and I'm an expert in popular culture and communications here at AUT, and I'm here to talk to you about why popular culture matters. So, first question, why do Marvel fanboys have such a bad reputation? Oh, this one's tricky. So let's think about it this way. Let's say you've been reading a comic book series for a very long time and you've come to expect something of a character and suddenly they diverge from that expectation. Or let's think about it another way. Let's say you've been a big comic book fan and suddenly the Marvel Cinematic Universe is happening, everything's on film, and it doesn't quite marry up with what you've experienced in the comics. Naturally, you're going to be disappointed, frustrated, and maybe a bit disheartened by what you're going to see. Happens to everyone. I mean, you might have a favorite book that's turned into a film that you're not quite happy with the casting about. What makes the situation different and perhaps gives the Marvel fanboys a bit of a bad reputation is that there are so many of them. They're a collective, they have lots of voices, and they can use social media to share their thoughts. And that perhaps, that loud voice that's coming through is what's maybe giving them a bad reputation, especially when Joe Blogs don't really know the differences, aren't really concerned about them when they watch, say, films or see the characters who do something a little bit different and unexpected. Let's have a look at another question. Who is the best Disney princess and why is it Rapunzel? I do think Rapunzel is one of the best Disney princesses, particularly because later princess movies have really focused in on individuality, empowerment, coming of age stories, the quest to separate from the parent, and Rapunzel really typifies that. If you think about her relationship with Mother Gothel, it's very much this trying to create distance, to overcome the trauma, the gaslighting that Mother Gothel has essentially been parenting her with. So it's very poignant, and Rapunzel's story really resonates with young audiences who are also coming of age and understanding their place in the world. Is it true that Marvel is going woke? They're not. All popular culture tries to reflect what's happening in society so it can resonate with its audiences. And of course, that has meant that the Marvel Cinematic Universe in particular has ultimately changed what it offers. But if you actually unpack those movies, they're still aspects of ageism, sexism, racism that continue to manifest. So no, they're not woke. All right, let's take a look at another question. Why are most, if not all, the female characters in my favorite games wearing revealing outfits? That's easy. You're not the target audience. It's as simple as that. Basically, if you think about who the target audience is, it's predominantly straight, white males, and they perpetuate those stereotypes of suggestive clothing, etc., the sexualization of women in order to meet those audience needs. All right, next question. Do women actually like superhero films or do they just pretend? They definitely like them. Look, there are parts of those films that women can identify with, particularly any of the discussions about relationship and relationship dynamics. Take the TV show Miss Marvel. People can understand and relate to the relationship between Kamala Khan and her parents. And that can be really interesting, it can be really intriguing, it can relate in the sense that they might have similar experiences. So yeah, people, women in particular, can enjoy superhero films. Admittedly, superhero films generally treat the female character as auxiliary. She's obviously portrayed as sexualized, etc. But women can overlook that if there are stories, if there are characters that really align with their own thinking, that they can buy into, as it were. Game of Thrones, The Office, and How I Met Your Mother all have unsatisfying endings. They do. Why do so many people hate the final season of their favorite shows? So there is a scholar who many moons ago discussed how when you release a creative product, you essentially have to craft a life cycle for it. So the product comes out and then you have to generate hype for it and it moves through the cycle and people respond to it and it gains traction. And that basically is how it navigates the creative marketplace. But What he also argues is that it essentially will kill itself over time. So that creative product will maybe run out of storylines, or perhaps it doesn't live up to the hype, or new products will come along and replace it in the marketplace. So essentially it gets killed off. It's the reason why, for example, people talk about why Grey's Anatomy is still running when perhaps it should have finished many seasons ago. Or they contrast that with something like Schitt's Creek, which they feel could have had more seasons, but many people would contend that actually it finished at the right time. The other thing to consider as well is that creative people can just lose interest in some of the projects. I mean, we all lose interest in projects. It's not unexpected that things will taper off as a response to that. All right, next question. Are AI concerts ethical? That really depends. If you take a concert like the current ABBA one that is AI generated, you could argue that yes and no. There are ethical aspects to it and there are non-ethical aspects to it. So if you think about authentic representation, they're actually ABBA, they're behind the scenes, they're filming this concert, and that experience then is reflective of ABBA. Maybe not truly reflective because they did de-age themselves, but there is a bit more reality to what's being produced. At the same time, you could argue that they're exploiting their fans by giving them an experience that isn't entirely live, isn't entirely authentic. So you could contend there's some ethical issues there. There have been discussions about having an Amy Winehouse AI-driven concert or a Michael Jackson AI-driven concert. That's where I think that the ethical issues become more pronounced, because we're dealing with people who are deceased and their experiences of how they might interpret those concerts, deliver those concerts, even experience those concerts are not going to be authentic because obviously they're not here to create them themselves. This is a cool question. Who is the best Disney villain? And what do they tell us about society? So preferential treatment here given to Mother Gothel from me, but I do think she's one of the best Disney villains. And I say that because she's also one of the most human, in the sense that she reflects current trends that exist within society. So things like narcissism, the desire to be young that are perpetuated through the different media messages that we're exposed to. She's also helping us to understand some of the trappings of gaslighting and trauma, and that's really useful to obviously understand how society has evolved and some of the issues that exist there. So she really typifies the sorts of villains that you might experience in your day-to-day interactions. We've got another question about Marvel. What makes Phase 1 Marvel films better than their new releases? Now, it's probably because they weren't rapidly produced. The new films are less about character growth. They're about jumping on this need to keep having superhero films out and kind of capitalizing on that interest that exists there. If you think about an example like Iron Man, as Tony Stark's character, he develops, he has this wonderful redemption arc. There was lots of time to be able to evolve his character to get him to that point. Marvel has essentially started to cannibalize itself. It is essentially doing what I mentioned before, in that it's killing itself off because it's had so much success and it's set these expectations. And so it's essentially, in trying to respond to all of this hype, all of this attention, ended up costing itself, and potentially they've recognized that because they're looking to actually reduce how many films and television shows that they're releasing. So stay tuned, they might actually have fixed that at some point. Okay, people I've talked to who were raised with the Star Wars prequels actually enjoy them. Is there a reason everyone else who is older hates the prequels? Don't know that everyone else hates the prequels, but I will admit that they don't necessarily live up to the expectations that people had having watched the original Star Wars films. They are potentially catered more to the audience of the time. So they had new special effects, they had new techniques that they could employ that weren't necessarily around the first time around. So that can kind of dilute what people were expecting. It doesn't live up to their expectations, especially when you think about how people will define themselves against what they're consuming. And if it doesn't live up to expectations, they feel a sense of disappointment, frustration, and so this is perhaps what's happened here. People are just not happy with them because they don't bring the same feelings that they initially did when they were watching the originals versus when they're watching the prequels. Why do I keep watching the same shows and sitcoms over and over again? Lots of reasons. It could be for nostalgia purposes. It could be for comfort. Sitcoms are designed to be easily consumed. They're essentially snackable. You don't have to invest too much energy into watching them. In fact, they allow for a small degree of escapism when maybe you just need to step out of doing something and you just want something easy to consume, something to relax to. Sitcoms are the way to go. What's the trend of streaming services dropping new series in halves like Bridgerton or episode by episode like House of Dragon? Just want to point out that back in the day when I watched TV, it was episode by episode. So this is a really interesting reverse back to the way things were, as it were. Now, there are a number of reasons that they do this. One is simply because a show like Bridgerton has massive production value, and so it costs a lot of money. It has a lot of time invested into making it, and so you want to try and get out as much as you possibly can by maintaining interest, prolonging its place in the creative marketplace, generating more attention for shows on Netflix in the in-between while people are waiting for the next part to drop. So it's about trying to recoup some of the money that gets put into these big productions as much as anything else. It's also about getting people to meme about it, to talk about it, to try and entice other people to watch it. And so that kind of gap in between is where a lot of the discussion takes place about what's going to happen next. So it's very much about keeping people interested, keeping the discussions happening, and buying the big organizations like Netflix time to get productions ready to go out into their streaming services. So that's probably why they're reverting back to some of the old ways. Why are there so many streaming services and why are they getting so expensive? Same thing that I was just talking about. Quality products cost money. So streaming is now the dominant way that people consume content. We've been conditioned to want to consume where and what we want when we want it. So everyone has jumped on that bandwagon. Ultimately, higher production values cost money, and so that means that they have to recoup their money somehow, and that will usually mean to some degree having to charge more of the audiences who are consuming this content. So that's why streaming services will often put up their prices and cut off your opportunity to share your logins. Oh, I like this last question. What's your favorite show? Look, I'm doing a bit of rewatching and I'm reliving my past a little bit here. I'm loving watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It's always been a favorite. And also Schitt's Creek. It's really, really fun to watch both of those shows. I'm a bit of a sitcom fan. Thanks for watching. I hope this has answered some of your questions, and particularly why popular culture matters.